Good morning. I'm going to try to go ahead and get started. I'll adjust the volume on these microphones as we turn them on and let people speak. But I did want to start by just reminding everyone, we want anyone and everyone who would like to speak or to make some comments or even ask some questions to please do that. I know we have probably some here with construction management firms, some general contractors. So what I would ask you to do is there's 3 sheets up here on the table. If y'all don't mind, after we kind of open up, and I'll be making a few more comments about kind of recapping what we've done so far. But I know we have some of you here that are willing to talk to us this morning. So if you don't mind, after we get started, we're going to do the pledge and we're going to offer a quick prayer and get started. But I would love for you to come up and sign the sheet, depending on which one you are, construction management firm or general contractor, a design professional. So if you don't mind, before we get started, we're going to do a quick Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Mr. Buddy, would you do us a quick prayer? What number are you?
Let us pray. Father in heaven, we come to you this morning in prayer, just join to our hearts to praise your holy name, to thank you for all your many blessings toward us, and ask for your guidance today as we consider the affairs of this state. These things we pray in your most holy name. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Mr. Buddy. So if y'all would, I know we've got a few here this morning that'd like to share with us. Just come on up and put your name on these sheets so I can call them. Don't everybody... Don't stay there. Because I may just call some people up and start asking some random questions. I wanted to let you know first, we had a little bit of an unusual situation with some of our members. Mr. Jimmy Pruitt called me, and I don't know if you know this, Mr. Buddy, but his daughter-in-law had a terrible accident at home and ended up having to have brain surgery as a result. And so we're certainly praying for her and that family, and then Mr. Emery Donahue, who's a representative from up in Hall County, he couldn't make it. Bill Werkheiser had a family trip planned, and one of the things that the speaker and some of the leaders have told me said, all you got to do is have the meetings. If they don't make it, that's not your fault. So I do apologize that we don't have more of the members here with us this morning, but just, consequences couldn't make it. But hope that we'll have some of you share with us this morning. I did want to recap just quickly kind of what we've done up until this point. This is the 4th study committee on the construction management and design, bid, build, delivery methods because of some of the concerns that we've heard from around the state in a number of districts, from our representatives and senators' districts, about some of the challenges that they're seeing with trying to have an opportunity to bid some of this work that the state is performing. And I don't have to tell you this, but one of the things that Mr. Woodward shared with us was that we've got about $1.56 billion bonded this year. And that's a lot of money and a lot of projects. And I think it was worth the study of making sure that everyone has the opportunity to bid to try to win some of that work that's paid for with the tax money that they've paid in. So that's what this study committee's doing. And in that first meeting, we heard about the different types of delivery methods, the design, bid, build, the select, build, design, build, and construction management at risk delivery methods. We learned a little bit more about how that process flows through those delivery methods. We learned a little bit about how different groups use those delivery methods, which was kind of I don't know about a shock to me, but it's a lot to absorb, where you have local governments that use them completely differently than, say, Georgia State Finance and Investment Commission. And the Board of Regents use them a little bit differently. The Technical College System of Georgia and our in our state colleges. You know, those delivery methods are there, but some of them use them completely different. And so that's a lot for this committee to try to wrap their mind around. In that second meeting, we dug a little bit deeper into the differences between those delivery methods. Instead of just a general 100,000-foot view, we actually got down to probably a 10,000-foot view on construction management at risk delivery method versus the design, bid, build, or the hard bid process. And we talked about the RFQs and the proposals, and then the scoring matrix. That was one that I think we could spend a whole nother day talking about because of the subjective nature in how those are scored, and what methodology is, and what overall impression is, and the ability to use local contractors, and what percentage of those scores equal up to your total rating, I believe is what it comes down to. And so then in the third meeting, we actually heard from our construction management firms, who are the general contractors or the firms that have chosen more of the construction management pathway, not the actual on-site work, I guess would be the way to say that. And so we heard testimony from individuals who were mostly specializing in the construction management at risk model or delivery method or pathway, and heard some good comments from them. And then we heard from our general contractors, which are the ones that we seem to be getting the most interest or concerns from. And when I say that, I can only speak for myself, but in my district and in rural Georgia, where I've had the opportunity to work and serve for 14 years with senators and now as an elected representative, the general contractors feeling like that the construction management at risk delivery method had all but completely excluded them from the opportunity to be able to sit at the table and look at a set of plans and specifications and put a hard number on a piece of paper and try to win those jobs. And again, I'm just kind of conveying to you what's shared with us or with me, and that is the perception. And we're trying to decide between perception and what's really happening out there on the ground, and then you add to it all of what I've already mentioned with the different colleges, technical colleges, Department of Educations, and local school systems or municipalities and regents all doing it a little bit different. You can imagine how complicated that gets when a person or a company is looking at trying to have an opportunity to win some of the work that Georgia's investing billions of dollars in. And I always feel like I need to say that's with a B, because the entire state budget is only $25 billion, and we're appropriating nearly $2 billion a year, or bonding rather nearly $2 billion a year in some of these investments into schools and college buildings or renovations or whatever. So anyway, I'll get those sheets and we'll kind of get kicked off. Mr. Buddy, do you have anything to kind of get things going that you'd like to?
No, thank you for the opportunity, Mr. Chairman, but I'm here to listen and see, learn a little bit more about this process.
All right, we're going to see who lucky number one is. All right, so I guess what we've got this morning is now Mark, I told you I wanted you to share with us this morning, so I'm going to kick it off with Mark Woodall with the Association of General Contractors. And what I'd asked Mark and I probably talk every week. I don't, maybe I forgot to call you back one week, but we talk a lot, and I've actually been talking to Mark probably longer about this than I have anybody else, because of how important his membership is to what we're going to try to do. That they're the ones, whether you're a general contractor and don't do much of the CM work, or whether you're a construction management at risk firm or a subcontractor, the Association of General Contractors is going to be essential to helping us figure out what, if anything, needs to be done to try to make sure we're doing this the right way. And what I'd asked Mark to share was, because of his unique perspective and working so closely with all of our contractors and the construction management firms, I just wanted him to share basically what's on his heart and kind of what he's hearing and what he knows about this, because he has a perspective from everybody. And so appreciate you coming, buddy, and didn't mean to catch you off guard and make you get this show started, but would love for you to share with us some of your thoughts about what we've talked about so far and maybe some suggestions.
That I have a whole lot of additional information to add. Actually, from the very first time we had this discussion on this topic in committee during the General Assembly last session, we said, again, we believe construction management at risk is a tool, as is design, bid, build, and other delivery methods. And if a tool is used inappropriately, sometimes you can get a bad result. What we also told the committee when I testified before, what we find our experience is, again, we're a statewide organization, large national, international firms in Metro Atlanta, small family-run businesses throughout the state. You have two situations, and we've heard a lot about this in, I think, the last committee hearing. You have very sophisticated owners that have professional staff that know how to implement this system for selecting a provider. Georgia State Finance Investment Commission, Board of Regents, larger metropolitan school boards. But we also have in our state a number of very small rural communities. And these communities may or may not have professional staff on board that is necessarily experienced in selecting a provider of these services. So what we have seen, we are aware as a statewide organization where there have been intentional things that have been done to tilt the award of a contract to a certain provider. But by and large, most, the strong majority, most of the situations where there's a problem is a lot of times these rural districts just don't know how to do it, don't know how to implement it, don't have, again, somebody on staff that is a professional from the industry to make those decisions. So we, as a result of this committee getting formed, have gone around the state and talked to our members, large and small, urban and rural. And there's some things that have been pretty consistent that, again, we'd like to share with the committee. In the public arena as opposed to the private arena, we absolutely believe that public procurement paid for with tax dollars needs to be known. It needs to be publicly advertised so folks have access to gaining that information about that contract. We also believe that the process for selection of the provider needs to be open and transparent. Again, we're strong believers that sunlight is the greatest purifier. So having that process be open and transparent is very important. Lastly, there are folks that have been providers as CMs for years, and there are others that are new companies that are growing. There needs to be a way for folks to gain entrance into the market, okay? So you ought not be excluded simply because you haven't been one before. You know, if you haven't been one before, how do you get to be one? So allow for a process that folks that otherwise have qualifications that are appropriate but maybe have not done a project as a CM at risk provider, don't make that an automatic disqualifier for those folks to gain interest into the market. We as a national organization have been part of developing a document with the National Association of State Facility Administrators. That's a best practices document. We've also done that with our state owners, the State Construction Manual, where private sector contractors, architects, engineers, along with our state agencies and designers, have produced a best practices document, not just on CM, but delivery of all construction services. And we think the void that's out there, quite frankly, is the local level, particularly, again, when you're getting in these smaller rural areas. So again, one of the things that we see would be beneficial to this committee, to our state, to our industry, is, again, adopt jointly best practices that give the folks the tool to know how to do this, to know how to create separation and scoring, to look at what needs to be looked at, what are appropriate categories for consideration. So we stand ready to do that. We've been working since this committee again got instituted. We've been talking with Regents and GISFIC and Department of Education, GMA and ACCG, and we're committed to fix this thing. But we very strongly feel that CM at Risk is a tool in the toolbox, and we think that our public owners should enjoy the same tools that our private owners in delivery of construction services. And if there's some things that need to be tightened up, we're all a part of that. And again, going back to the three major issues, we think needs to be open, allow folks to gain entrance into the market, needs to be transparent, folks need to be made aware of the opportunities, and you ought not be excluded simply because you've never been one before. I'd be happy to try and answer any questions.
And I've heard you use the phrase best practices many times. And just remember, and I like to remind everyone when we meet that this is a citizen legislature. You know, I'm in the termite and pest control business, and Mr. Buddy's a pharmacist. When you say best practices in this scenario, elaborate on that a little bit, what you mean when you say we want to implement a best practices.
I'll pick on Department of Education. We have a law that governs our public procurement processes. Basically, you got to advertise 4 weeks. They have delivery options either as a competitive seal bid or a competitive seal proposal. Then you go to proposal side, you can do CM at Risk, you can do design build, you can do a number of different things. But the law can only cover so much, okay? And you've been down here a while. The second you get a law done, someone will find a little crick that you can take advantage of, and you're right back to next year trying to adjust the law because someone's found a way around it. So the law needs to be the foundation of this topic, but then you move to rules. Rules get a little bit more detailed and than what the law does, you know, to help you implement it. But beyond the law, beyond the rules, you need to adopt and adhere to industry best practices. If it's a one-sided equation where only the public owners or only the contractors or only the designers are dictating how this has to go forward, it's probably going to be tilted in one of those directions. When you have a collaborative approach, okay, you're dealing with the law, you're dealing with the regs, and then you have industry-developed, public owner-developed, jointly developed best practices, that's when you get your best result. So we can't put enough stuff in the law to cover everything that you've heard during your hearings, but you can cover that. And the industry evolves. I mean, there's stuff happening today that wasn't happening 10 years ago. So as the industry evolves and things are new and folks need to be made aware of it, that joint collaboration between the private sector and our public owners come up with best practices is what we'd like to suggest or offer for this effort above and beyond what the law and our regs require.
Which is a separate document of some sort, a book or like the construction manual that we have now.
That's our state best practices document. Yes, sir. We have a national one as well. We don't necessarily, I know Todd Edwards was ACCG's here. When we first got our public works law developed, we did come up with a document on the parameters of the law, but it's not necessarily a best practices document. It could be expounded on greatly.
All right, and one of the things that we have talked about up until this point is trying to help everyone understand the differences in a construction management delivery method and a design bid build type of a delivery method. We certainly don't have time for you to cover every bit of that, but I think it would be beneficial to this committee, or to me and Mr. Buddy and the members of us that are here, to try to somehow condense down the very high points of why one is better than the other, or why for all of the years that we use design bid build, architect designs it, The owner approves it, has the blueprints and specification, the owner approves it, you submit it out for bid, and the contractors who feel like they can do it and can get the bonding and experience, et cetera, how that tool is different than the old tried and true method of what we have done for so many years, just kind of and again, I know that's hard to do, but
Well, first of all, we don't think one is better than the other at all. There are different delivery methods that are more likely to produce a positive result than others based upon the conditions of the project.
and that would be something I'd like for you to try to cover. Give me an example of a project that has conditions that is more conducive to construction management versus a project where the delivery method would be a good fit, because I think that may be something that we look at, is that trying to put some requirements or some parameters around justification of one over the other.
There are some very knowledgeable folks that you'll probably hear from later that can do a better job with that question than I can, but I'll give you an easy example for you to understand. When it is a design, bid, build project, the owner is separately contracting with the architect, and they are producing what's supposed to be a complete set of plans, okay? So all that effort in design of that project is being done by the architect well before the contractor is involved. They do a good job most of the time, but we run into situations quite often that I have, as a general contractor, I have to bid what's on the documents, not what's supposed to be on the documents, okay? And that is taking place with a bunch of other general contractors that are trying to get that job. So I can't bid what's supposed to be there. I have to bid what is there on the documents. So you've got electrical, you've got mechanical, you've got plumbing, you've got concrete, you've got all the different packages, all the different scopes within that project. And I, as a general contractor, and attempting to be the lowest responsive and responsible bidder, I'm competing with 20, 30 other people. So I've done work with Ms. Pope a number of years. I know that's a good price coming in. I got all these numbers. Let's say it's the electrical category. And I get a bid 10 minutes before my bid is due, and it's low, but it's from a party that I don't know. I've never done work with them before. I don't know, but it is out there, and I know the 20 other folks that are attempting to get that contract are also getting that number. So they make that tough decision as a business. Do I not take that number and go with Pope that I've worked 20 times and I know that's a legitimate number, or if I really want to get the contract, I take that chance because 20 other people have it, and I take it from an unknown. Many times doing that results in buying somebody that has underbid the project, that is under cost, and that's where the problems begin, okay? So I've got a subcontractor on this project that can't deliver what they've promised to deliver for the price that they've submitted. And so the dance starts.
Is that, if you take that low price because you're worried about not being awarded the job, is that the person that gave you the low price's fault, or is that your fault as the general contractor?
Well, they gave me the low price, but I'm the general contractor. They don't have a contract with the owner. I do. That's mine.
right.
I
But
bought it.
again, you get to make up your mind which way you want to go. You
That-
get to decide,
Absolutely.
is it more important to win the job, or is it more important to make sure that I'm doing my due diligence on these prices?
Absolutely. And they've been in that business for years, and they make those tough decisions all the time. The second scenario where you can have a problem is something that should have been on the design is not on the design. And it
And whose fault would that be?
well, that's where the dance starts as well. It's a
If
whole
the
lot of this.
architect leaves it off, and clearly it should have had air conditioning in it, the owner's gonna eat that?
The owner's not, I mean, it's coming from somewhere. It's a problem. It's a problem on cost. It's a problem on time. It's a problem that has to be. Now, those are extreme examples, okay? Design bid build works very well when you have a clear defined scope.
Well, the way I'm hearing, and I apologize for interrupting you, either it works or it doesn't.
I'm
It-
giving
we
you,
can
I'm
use it
giving
in
you
some
worst case
projects.
scenario,
Okay.
okay, on why folks have moved to consider these other delivery systems. It works very well when you have a clear defined scope, you have a qualified pool, you have good documents, complete documents. It works fantastic, and it will produce the lowest cost under those scenarios generally. Okay, the CM at risk, okay, is you select an architect separately, but before they finish the complete design, they contract with the CM. So you get the benefit of the CM's construction knowledge for input on schedule, on products, on time, all those different things. So rather than being, the earlier example I gave you, an adversarial relationship, you should have put that in the documents you didn't put in. You were in this fight with the owner over here. Now I'm brought on board as a team member. We are working in a collaborative fashion with the designer and the owner to make sure those documents are complete, that we get cost data for the owner to consider from the marketplace. So you've moved from what can be a very adversarial relationship. You didn't put something in those documents that should have been in the documents, and now we have the change order dance, to being considered a team member. We're working together to get the end result. And another component of it, we talked about the subcontractor and the low number. I have an opportunity to vet my subcontractor, my prices, to make sure that they can deliver that electrical work for that price, versus taking that low number 10 minutes before bid time, and I've got to make that decision under that environment.
And when you say adversarial relationship, if I'm the owner and I am the president of one of these colleges, or I'm a city council, or technical college system, whomever, and we design a facility, and we've approved the specs, to the architect says, here, this is your building, this is what we're going to do. I'm still trying to figure out how it's adversarial when the architect clearly lives something out under the extreme scenario, and I'm the owner, and I say, nope, that's on the architect. Then the architect has to fix that in working with the contractor, because it's already bid, we've already started when we realized something was left out. And so the owner doesn't eat that. To me, that's not adversarial. As the owner, as the person responsible for appropriating tax dollars, we are the owner. You can be adversarial if you want to. You'll never get another day's work in Georgia with public dollars. I'm still trying to figure out how there's kumbaya in construction management, but there's an adversarial relationship in design, bid, build, where somebody's got to be accountable.
There isn't, didn't mean to say that there always is, okay?
Do they leave anything out of construction management projects?
I'm sure that you have 3 or 4 major owners here that are probably in a much better position to respond to the owner perspective on this. But I'm both of those is giving you the extremes of what can happen and does happen. But your public owners can tell you what happens even when there is a problem, that whether it's architect or whether it's subcontractor or CM, you still run the risk. That school has to open up on time. I mean, it can't be late.
Right, and that's gonna be a part of our conversation, is about how do you put a value, and I think Mr. Woodward mentioned that there's some value in making sure that they're delivered on time. But even under a design, bid, build, they have to tell you when they're gonna be done. I've never seen one that had an open-ended date on completion. If you know of one, I would love to see it. So time will be a part of the conversation, but you're going to have to show me a contract that has an open-ended date for me, and I believe others, to make that a real important part of the conversation between the differences in the two. Mr. Buddy.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I've just got a question that I've heard several people say, oh, you don't have but just 10 minutes to make a decision on a subcontractor, on a contract, or whatever it is. Why is that? Why, I mean, can the bid process be
it's a
arranged differently?
It's a great question. The reason that is the subcontractors don't want their price shopped against their competitors. And so they wait, they hold it to the very last minute, and they provide it within that time frame. But they don't want their price shopped against their competitors.
All right, they don't want their price shopped, but can't you as a contractor say, I want that bid in time for me to assure that my bid is correct?
They can try.
I mean, if, it looks to me like, you don't want to make that decision, and you can make some mistakes there. So wouldn't just a little tweaking of the process, and maybe have the contractor sign a, I swear I won't.
Representative Harden, we've been trying to address that issue for 100 years. It's unethical to shop someone else's number. It's supposed to be a competitive sealed bid.
Sure.
But there is some validation. You need to make sure that they've got the appropriate scope. But, we for years as an organization have tried to address that from our subcontractor community, our specialty contractors, and our GCs. We've basically, where we've landed on the topic is, you need to price people appropriately. If they're not treating you fairly, they probably ought to get a higher price from you. And don't play the game. Don't bid with people that are going to treat you that way. I mean, it takes two to commit the act of prostitution. But it does happen in our industry without a question.
Well, it seems to me that it should be pretty easy to, I mean, we secure other transactions, financial, et cetera, that, to the point that, that can slip in. And if we, made that an illegal act to shop and then somebody was caught, we'd just put them in jail. I mean, I don't understand why we can't get to a point where people can deal in business in trust without, without just making it a last-minute situation and that causing a lot of problems. Just a thought.
Well, and it kind of leads to a follow-up question in relation to the potential for price shopping in the last minutes. They turn in their bid. Under the construction management at risk model, one of the questions that we asked as a committee was, who gets the prices from all of the different trade groups to eventually come up with the maximum allowable amount? Who gets those prices? Is it the owner of the construction management firm shops all of that out to the concrete people, for example? If I'm awarded a construction management at risk project, we go back to the office and we start submitting proposals or requests from all of these contractors. Who holds that little process accountable? How do they not end up getting a low number? What do they do when somebody shoots them a low number that they're not familiar with?
Again, this is done not in the rush of the bid time is 2:00 on Tuesday. It's a well thought out process. You send out invitations. They're generally required to have 3 competing proposals per package, and they have a lot of time to vet that information in that submittal. It's not bids due at 2:00 on Tuesday. They can have weeks to call someone up, get clarification, to make sure that low number can in fact be done for that price, and they've got everything in it that it's supposed to have.
And I guess that is part of why they charge a fee for doing all of that work. It just seems to me kind of interesting that under a design bid build project, a general contractor does all of that work for free. He does all the planning and does all of the bidding for free, because if he don't get the job, he's out. Whereas under the construction management at risk method, you've already selected them and agreed on a fee. They're getting paid to sit there and take weeks to decide and vet. Somebody's paying for that. And so, under the design bid build, you could potentially cut out hundreds of thousands. If you just said that a design bid build has a deadline, 1 man out of 20 will get it. 19 lost money bidding that job. That 1 man that got it didn't take weeks to decide and vet and get paid for it. So just that little scenario alone has the potential to cut hundreds of thousands of dollars out of that process. Now, if you do have the extreme scenario where there is some design mistake or a general contractor that's bidding that work, a concrete, looked at a square footage number wrong or how much concrete, yeah, you can get back into some of that. But again, I'm just trying to wrap my mind around those two differences, where a general contractor that's hard bidding it has to come up with a number on Tuesday. If he don't get that job, all that costed him money. But under a construction management at risk delivery method, you just paid them a 5% or whatever the fee is, general conditions and all this other stuff. They can vet those. But now who goes back to look at whether or not they took the low price from those people? Who goes to the construction management firm that was selected and audits where those numbers came from? Who says, show us where that concrete price was the lowest? How is that conveyed back to the owner that it was the low bid?
Well, again, you probably would be better off getting one of your major public owners to answer that question. I will tell you, our funding cycles with the General Assembly, Marvin, correct me if I'm wrong.
You want me to step up there with him?
Sure, absolutely.
We sometimes don't fully fund a project. You may fund pre-construction or design one legislative cycle and come back the following year and fund construction. And sometimes it actually doesn't happen.
Okay. I'll tell you how we do that. I have 20 project managers that work on my staff. We review every submission that the contractor receives to ensure that we're, first of all, that we received three bids. If we can't, we ask why, and we encourage them to try to go get some more, and to ensure that it's the low price. There have been a few occasions where we have not taken the low price because we did not have confidence in that subcontractor based on experiences that we had on recent jobs where they didn't perform well. Most of the time we take the low number, probably 99% of the time, but every once in a while we will not.
You take the low that is of one of the three that is submitted to you.
Or more. The beauty of the CM process, and I would say, I'll emphasize the word beauty, is the CM is going to choose what subcontractors they want to do business with. So which ones they're going to invite. So that way they're comfortable that those subcontractors can perform.
And that lends to the ones who have concerns, because they are not getting the opportunity to bid to those construction management firms. And when you're dealing with public dollars, I can't imagine that there would not be an opportunity even because the construction manager can't perform the work, right? Or they don't. Sometimes they'll perform some of the work and sometimes not.
Rarely.
But rarely. So they're taking prices from basically every trade group on the project. And so even a plumbing contractor or a heating and air conditioning, insulation, they're not getting an opportunity. So when these firms were scored out off of the short list, that trickles down, because they get to hand pick their preferred subs. And if you do that, then you're probably not going to get that hungry guy that's on the fringes that says, I'm not going to make much on this job, but I need to work. And he throws you a low number, and he gets excluded because they were afraid to take that low number either on the last 10 minutes or under the construction management delivery method. The firm says, we're just going to get bids from these three that we have a good relationship with. But when you're dealing with public dollars, I can't imagine that every licensed, qualified, experienced contractor, from an old boy that's got a 16-ounce east wing framing hammer to one that's got a fleet of 40 trucks to plumb buildings, can't have an opportunity to go in there and bid that work, even under CM at risk. And again, I hear you. And I don't think that people are intentionally leaving all of these people out of these processes. I don't think they're intentionally doing it. But the only way I can think of that a person would be willing to take all of the risk is if he has all of the control and making a good portion of the money. So my question was,
We're asking the CM to take a lot of risk, so they're gonna team up with firms that they have confidence in. So I think that's where you and I will have to agree to disagree.
well, yeah, I'm just wondering what that risk is worth, is what you'll hear me say. We certainly need people that
It's
are
worth-
willing to be accountable
It's worth their business.
to take on that risk. Well, if they,
Construction is high risk, high reward.
right, and if they fall out on design, bid, build, same thing. You're out of business.
That's correct.
So construction management, high risk, high reward. Design, bid, build, high risk, high reward. I would say that
I would say from an owner's standpoint, though, the CM at risk process is less risky for us.
for the owner.
Correct.
And I think that's probably what you'll see us try to figure out is how much of the taxpayers' money is that worth?
Well,
Because,
I'd like to go back to a previous conversation you had about the design bid build process, where they do all this work up front for free. There's no free lunch.
all the
Some-
ones that didn't get the
Well,
job,
who's paying those people to perform that work? I mean, they're getting a paycheck at the end of the day. That work is built into the prices that you're getting on the design bid build process. They're
If-
not doing that for free.
if I'm a general contractor, not a construction management firm, and I'm going through that bid and I'm bidding the job and I'm setting the schedule and putting that number in the pot by 5 o'clock or whatever the timeline is on Tuesday, I have just done a lot of the work, or no, all of the work that a construction management firm's doing after he's selected and they start paying him or her. So that was my point. I've already put the bid, the numbers, and all of that together. I've already set the schedule. But if the design's not even complete, there's no way that a construction manager has already locked in the price and the schedule.
You are correct.
So that was my
But
point.
to assume that work is free is
Well,
not
no, it
accurate.
is only free to those. It is calculated into their cost of doing business. There's no
Correct.
question.
Just like when you give a quote for,
But when he said they can take 3 weeks to vet it, let me tell you who can't do that. Is that guy that's got to turn in that bid at 5 o'clock. He cannot take 3 weeks to vet it.
and thus the reason that the CM at risk process was formed, because there's some value in that vetting process.
And that's what we want to find out, is what that value is
It's-
worth.
It's, okay. It's simply that you ensure yourself that you have a complete scope. Now, I'm not gonna say in the CM at risk process, even though we go through that process, it's always accurate, but there's a lot more back and forth. And as an owner, I'm more confident that the design is more complete than the design bid build process, because there's nobody checking, the architect for completeness. Most owners don't have the staff to do that. So by all these different subs looking at the plans as they're being developed, it's a team approach. I'll go back to that word that Mark, just the mindset of a CM process is teamwork.
And,
Where a design bid build, it's profit.
and I think perhaps we go to the results then of each. So there are change orders in construction management delivery method.
Certainly.
Okay,
The
And there-
majority of those are owner requested.
which is neither here nor there. But architects make mistakes in construction management delivery.
Sure.
Contractors overlook things in construction
Sure.
management. So they're still all there. Maybe we can transition that into explaining to us what contingency is. What's the contingency money part of that proposal?
The earlier you are in the design process, the more contingency you have. So as an owner, we typically set aside 5% right off the top for unexpected,
Which are change orders and
which are change orders, or, yeah.
5%.
You know, typically it's because of, we're not totally sure what's under the ground or what you may encounter. Typically, once you get out of the ground, we release some of that contingency back to the project so that they can maybe include some things that got eliminated initially.
And so it, again, I apologize for just continuing, but it almost sounds to me like you're offering an insurance policy per se for all of that teamwork that you say is so valuable to the process. Why would you need contingency money if everybody's working in collaboration and all of those subs are looking at the contract or the project design and all of them are in agreement and you get your prices from everybody? 5% is a lump of a $10 million or a $20 million or a $30 million project. I would love to have a 5% contingency on every job I quote. And I just wonder how that is not more proof that that delivery method still has some niches in its armor, so to speak, where you can,
Right, we're gonna
For-
have contingency regardless of the delivery method. Though. We're gonna still do that with design bid build. In fact, I might even have a larger contingency on a design bid build job because it's not gonna be vetted as much, and as an owner, the risk is greater. So there's contingency from an owner's perspective regardless of what delivery method.
on all projects that we let.
Correct. I mean, we recently did a job in Brunswick where we took borings on the four corners of the building. Guess what? Right smack in the middle was a garbage pit. We missed. We didn't take one in the middle of the building. Stuff happens.
And that contingency under construction management is where that money would come from to try to correct that or whatever.
Either way, even if it was a design bid build, that's where that money would come from.
Would you say that, and again, this is just probably an open-ended question, but is there more of that contingency utilized under one or the other? I mean,
No,
not really,
Not
basically ends up about the same.
yes.
And one of the things that at the end of the project, say when you're moving towards the end of the project and there was not much of that contingency money used, what happens with that?
Couple things. There's usually a list of things that the owner would like. If it's appropriate, we try to incorporate that in the project. If they've received everything that they want, then that money will get redirected to another project within that agency. And there's a process at GISFIC where we do that. Office of Planning and Budget gets involved. If it's over a certain amount, the governor, lieutenant governor, speaker, all vote on that redirection request.
Mm-hmm.
It usually stays within that agency, so moving it from one project that maybe had a surplus to another one that needs some funds.
And that's probably different with the Department of Education and local school systems on contingency in the way that they,
Usually, in a state-funded project on the DOE side, that contingency really rests in the owner's contribution. You know, there's probably just, this is very broad strokes, so it's not always accurate, but in a large project like a new school, you might have 30 or 40% state funds, everything else is local. So when we're reimbursing those projects, we're not considering contingency because if the contingency is used, it's part of that local budget. Does that make sense?
Yeah. the local revenue.
And just to expound, Chairman, on Mr. Rowland's comment, that percentage, and we have a required local in that's required of every project from that local district. So that's on top of our participation in that project. Up to 20% is gonna be local required anyway.
Right.
So
And that contingency would be out of that
that is correct.
portion.
That is correct.
I'm just trying to remember that, that GISVIC is much different than our Department of Education, schools, and those kind of things.
There is a difference.
Well, look, I appreciate y'all.
One more thing I
Yes,
want
sir.
to emphasize, though, we keep talking about cost. Keep in mind the schedule. So on a CM process, the design can overlap with the start of the construction. So you can start site work, foundation work, before you have the roof design complete. In a design build process, it's all linear. You've got to have a complete design before the GC can bid it. So from a GISVIC standpoint, there's a lot of pressure at these universities to meet a certain semester. And so that delivery method allows us to get started sooner. And so it's more likely that we can deliver. One example, I got a call from the president of Georgia Gwinnett College last week. 12 years ago, that campus had 0 students. Today, he's got 12,300 students. He needs a building next fall. He already has students scheduled for that classroom space. He said, get me the classrooms, don't worry about the office space. I already have students scheduled. As a manager of that process, I am much more comfortable that I can deliver for him with the CM at risk process than I could with design bid build. That's a lot of value to him to have that space. He's got students he's got to provide instruction for, and so we are just putting up steel on that building, so think about that. We've got to have classrooms August 1 of next year. So you want to make sure you've got a contractor that can deliver. You want to make sure you have subs that are ready to go and can provide a quality product on time. So that's the dilemma we're in a lot of times, is trying to deliver a quality project at that semester that the schools need it. And a lot of our campuses are in that same boat.
Right, and I think not a rebuttal, but just to sort of, my thinking is that you are going to pay tremendously for someone to take on that timeline and that risk and that process. Now, I have compassion for needing to get kids in a building, I really do. But that's hard to explain to people who say, well, you could have postponed that, just say
Right.
3 months or whatever. Was it worth $2 million or $10 million? And that again, dealing with public dollars, I totally agree with your side of this. But there is a point of diminishing return on everything that we do. And there has to be a way to identify the mark of the value of that versus the cost that it's fixing to have to do it. I can't imagine that one group shows up and I can do it in 5 months, and another group says, well, I could do it in 10 or 7, and that basically all you're really doing is saying, I need it sooner. Here's the price. Let's you see what I'm saying?
I do see what you're saying, but because we were allowed to start site work and foundation work before the design was complete, we at least have a shot at getting him this building. If it was under the design bid build method, we would have no shot at trying to get him that building because the design process would have eaten into the construction time.
Yeah, and one of the things that someone has asked me is, and I'm not an engineer, but the majority of these projects are not that complicated. these engineers, I would be willing to bet you, if you called them today and they really got jumping, went out there and looked at the site work, plans, survey, getting ready to put a building on a piece of property. After they get that site work figured out and figure out what that footer's going to look like, it's cut and paste. Now, you can say it's not, and design professionals may disagree. But studs are studs. Concrete's concrete. Hot's on the left, cold's on the right. You know what flows downhill. I can't imagine that you've got to start a man pouring concrete the day you decide that the footer's going to be this wide and this deep and this is the step downs. I've never seen that, even under construction
No,
management.
it's not that soon.
And
No,
so,
no, you're exactly right. It's just the time frame gets collapsed, so the coordination, the communication, the teamwork, attitude on all the parties is critical if you're gonna deliver something
absolutely.
in that. So it's not that it's that complicated, it's just that there's not a lot of room for hiccups.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Mr. Mark, you got anything else you want to? I want to put another plug in for my buddy Mark, man. He's been patient with me. I was like trying to educate the most naive person up here, but thank you for your patience with me and always willing to talk to me
Well,
about this.
Appreciate my adult supervision coming up to answer that question.
Oh, all right. Well, we're gonna move on to some others. Mr. Steve Adelot with SOA Construction. I've told him this on the phone. I apologized. We've got fewer presenters today, and we're gonna be fine on time. But had to cut Mr. Steve short at the last meeting, and so he's wanting to come back and share with us, and I appreciate you doing that. And I apologize. You wherever you want to go. I'd prefer you to kind of come sit up here so we can have our other committee members get a good look at you.
Last time I made this thing hiccup, so.
Yeah, one of the
Make sure
things
it's
I
good.
asked you to do, if you didn't mind, is sort of share with the committee a specific example of a situation where, you were qualified, experienced, licensed, just as capable of doing a project as any of the other contractors. But because of how we select or whatever, construction management firms, you felt like you were left out, and that's one of the things that
Yeah, and Marvin may or may not be aware of some of the projects we did with JustFIC, but the ones that we actually contracted with JustFIC were through the design bid build method. And the last one we did was there were like 5 prison dormitories, and the all 5 of them were put out to bid. The one that I bid was close to our office, so we picked that one as one of the ones. It was the last one to bid, and we were low bidder, and I'm not sure about the rest of them, but that particular dormitory was inside the fence, perimeter fence. So it was very complicated, very, an intense, bid to put together. So out of those 5 projects, we were the last one to bid, but we were the first one to finish out of those 5 projects. So I don't know when the first one started, but it was, I think several months before we actually got started. So to say that, what I want to explain is that we had a very successful design bid build project with JustFIC, and I don't know of any situation that could have been more complicated than that. The day we had to cut the perimeter fence, I was on pins and needles. Yeah, we had to cut that fence and put a gate in it. So you can imagine what was going through my mind, and the risk. If you want to talk about risk, can you imagine prisoners getting let out and running all over Dooley County? I mean, that was a big time step for us. Of course, we had to, get checked in every day. Every tool we had to be checked in. Every tool we had to be checked out. The batteries and all the equipment had to be checked in, and the batteries and the equipment had to be checked out. So I'm saying all that to say that the documents that we had to put this project together with was very well done. And it appeared that they had done one before. And it was spelled out. I mean, we had some change orders. There was some hiccups along the way. We worked them out, In the end, the owner was very satisfied. We got an award. What I've been told by the Department of Corrections was we were the only contractor to get a commissioner's coin, award for our performance on that job. Now, I'm just telling you what they told me. But to say that design, bid, build can't be successful and we can't be adults and professionals and work together is kind of short. I mean, that's all I've ever done is aside in the public realm, but in the private realm, I'll tell you my experience there too. But in the public realm, we've always hard bid the projects and this country was, founded by people that think outside the box. And in my experience, I don't try to go after the lowball subs. We get them, and sometimes I toss them in the trash. But before we bid a job, we perform those pre-construction services that, Marvin and Mark were talking about. I mean, we put together a schedule. We do a detailed estimate. We have an estimate on the electrical before we even get a bid. So we know how much it's going to cost. So we have our price, and then we have columns for the subs. And so if I'm on bid day, if I get prices that are high and low, and I'm not comfortable with it, sometimes I can plug my own number in there. So it's just about being prepared, for that day. And, you hear horror stories. I mean, I've had them too, where you get some guy that, wait till the last minute, give you a bid. But there's ways to manage that. If you think through it, you can manage that. And on the pre-construction side and in the CM at risk, you have a lot more time to put together a project. But on a hard bid job, we have a team that just, and my superintendent's involved in it, and we look at that job and figure out, what is the fastest way we can build this thing. And just for instance, one job we looked at, the building was actually big enough to put the roof together inside the building on the slab and pick it up with a crane and turn it and set it in place. And the architect was just blown away, by the thought of, wow, how did y'all, we thought it out. It wasn't something that we, just saw on the bid market and decided we were going to, bid that project tomorrow. We thought it out. We prepared for that day, and we meticulously put our heads together to make sure that we had the best plan available that we could come up with to do the project and make money. So there's, and some companies don't want to put that effort forth. And those are the ones that you find on bid day that are scrambling and trying to figure out where they are. And sometimes they don't know for weeks. They'll go through all their bids and try to figure out, can we cover this, project with the numbers that we got? And so, there's preparation and then there's chaos, and I'm not saying that even though you prepare, you're not going to have some chaos. I mean, you will, but you're better prepared to handle it, on bid day. Now, the answer to that, and I heard one of the members say, why can't we do something? We can. South Carolina has a a way where the subs have to turn in their bid like the day before or something like that. I mean, there's ways to make this system work really good. And I would say that would probably be a right step, to fix that issue. And it is an issue. I mean, even if you're prepared, it's an issue. So I would strongly suggest that we look at something along that line to straighten that out. But and I'm saying all this to say that I felt like since March 1997 when we started our business, we're 20 years old this year. I've prided myself on doing complicated jobs. I didn't want an easy job. I wanted something complicated because I felt like I could figure out how to build it in a way that nobody else could build it and make money and be the low price. That's on public work. Now, on private work, we do a lot of design build. And I'll tell you that, in my environment, and I don't know about in government environment, but if you show a picture of a project without a guaranteed price to match up with it, then you're asking for trouble, because one of them's going to get out of line somewhere down the road through the pre-construction process. So what we do is when we do like a preliminary design and then we put a price tag with it, we actually do the estimate without any drawings. I mean, there's computer models and there's all kind of ways you can do it nowadays, that you can get fairly accurate estimates on what it's going to cost to do that job. Now, site work is sometimes a little more difficult. You might have to put some contingencies in there for that, but you show the picture and the price, and once you show them that, then you make sure those two stay together through the design process. So when you're finished, you got a project you can build. And that's basically what the CM does is they put together a schedule, they put together an estimate, and they work with the architect, through this process to make sure that the architect's not designing outside the money. I mean, that's basically
I think Mr. Buddy's got a question
Yes.
for you.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, this is actually not a question of him to answer, but a question that comes to my mind is, and maybe I just don't know enough yet. I've been listening, trying to get this together, but sounds to me like a construction company is more at risk on a design bid build than they are on the construction manager at risk system. Does that make sense? If I bid a job at a price to be completed by a certain date, would it not make more sense to put penalties on the construction company for not doing that job correctly than it does to pay up front to see if we can ensure that it's not done correctly? I'm just and on the issue of why can't you turn in bids early from subcontractors? We heard one state does that, and that would make the general contractor, I guess, more aware of what his costs were going to be and more aware of the people he was going to use. That would be included in his bid. So to me, it seems that the construction company takes more risk with a design bid build. I don't know. Maybe I haven't learned enough about the system yet to know. But, and I don't know whether you can answer my question or not, but
well, and I'm eventually going to answer your initial question, but in my opinion, when let's say that I'm submitting for a CM at risk, okay, I'm being selected based on what I've done in the past, and I'm being selected on a fee. There's no price, and GISFIC may have done it a little different, but on school board contracts I've seen, there's not a price nailed down, to where there is some risk. The ones I've seen are basically, I'm gonna get paid 5% for my fee, I'm gonna get paid 1% for pre-construction services, and I'm gonna get paid 10% for general conditions. Okay,
All
and
right,
so,
I see that, but as I'm trying to put this all together, you say if you bid construction manager at risk, that there's a fee and it's based on your previous performance. But that's not what I'm reading in this book, with construction manager at risk. We're not, a very small portion of that is based on previous performance. Most of it is based on some subjective, how you presented your plan and who presented your plan and that type of thing. So I disagree with you that, when you're doing one construction manager at risk, that it's based on your previous performance. I've forgotten the percentages, but previous performance is a very small percentage of that process.
Okay. Well, I'm testifying on what I've seen.
Yeah.
Okay, in the past, and the fact that you have risk at CM is kind of an understatement, really. I mean, the only risk they have is trying to convince the architect to design something that they may not want to design. In other words, we were talking about, the dance earlier that Mark referred to on design bid build, where an architect leaves something out. His errors and omissions insurance should pick up and cover that. Okay, and the owner would not be responsible. Okay, that should be a change order to the contractor, and they should move on. In a CM at risk, it's just like design build. You got an architect, a design professional, and you got multiple design professionals over here on this side, and you got a contractor telling them they can't design something a certain way. Can you imagine what kind of fireworks that's going to cause? I mean, the CM wants professionals that they've dealt with before, and maybe that's another conversation, but the only risk in CM at risk that I see is trying to convince that architect or that engineer, hey, this project is $10 million and we've got $1 million worth of concrete, and you've got $1.5 million worth of concrete. You've got to figure out a way to reduce the footings so that we can stay in budget. I mean, that conversation happens. And if you don't have a good relationship with that design professional, then things don't go well. Typically you don't see that outside of, that environment. But to say there's risk, I mean, there's risk in everything, but there's tremendous risk in a design bid build versus CM at risk. And it's just my opinion, but there's maybe others here that oppose that.
If you would, share with us a specific instance.
Yeah.
Where, and when I say specific, I mean, you don't have to name the project and the competitors and all this, but I usually have people call me like yourself and will say, hey, I bid so-and-so job, and I've built a dozen of those.
Yeah, yeah.
But yet I never had a construction management at risk.
Yeah. Well, and my little story earlier about the prison project was kind of preface to what I'm going to say now. There was a project that GISFIC had out. It was, I think it was West Georgia College. It was like $1 million renovation or something like that, and it's several years back. And this was back before the economy got real bad. And so I'd called one of the contracting officers up there, and I said, look, I've got several jobs with you guys. And, it says you got to have, it's kind of like the chicken or the egg, It says you got to have CM experience. And I said, I've done design build, I'm not done CM. And what he told me was, just put down the projects you've done as a general contractor. And he was going to be on the board, to review the proposals. And I said, well, it's not CM. He said, well, you're managing construction, right? And I said, yeah, I'm managing. So, so I put all my previous experience down. Now this is like $1 million renovation, and it asked for, you know, a 2-inch binder full of information, your methodology, and all the typical things that you got to come up with, you know, and your, you know, personnel and, you know, all that kind of stuff. So I submitted the proposal, and, you know, we didn't get shortlisted on that. I did another one at Fort Valley State, and I'd done a project with Fort Valley State through GISVIC, and everything went well.
Hard bid.
Hard bid, yeah. And then we tried this CM, and same result. You know, I couldn't get shortlisted. So at the point in time all this was going on, you know, the economy was getting slow, and they were converting from hard bid to CM at risk, and I didn't have time to sit and try to figure out how to get a CM job. So we just stayed with hard bid and just started looking at hard bid work, and then we started looking at, you know, negotiated work and, you know, some other industries, some industrial work and that sort of thing to keep busy, you know, through the downturn. So to say that, you know, we have, you know, been, you know, poking the stick, so to speak, trying to get in the door for CM. We tried a few times. I think it was maybe another time that we tried, but I just dropped it. And because it was just, you know, it was a lot of work up front, and if you don't get shortlisted, you know, you've spent all that money on, you know, trying to prepare to get there. So we just dropped it. And then economy's getting a little better. I've got a little more time to look at other markets that I want to get into, and so I'd love to try to get some CM work. You know, I feel like we got experience to do it, and like I testified earlier in the last hearing, you know, our license is no different than a CM license. I mean, I don't know why there's, you know, the difference. I mean, the pre-construction services that CM provides are exactly the same thing that we do prior to a bid date. I mean, you put together a schedule, you put together your estimate, you know, you prepare, and that's the same thing you do. So I don't know what magic there is, you know, saying there's a CM versus a GC. There, in my mind, I'm still not convinced there's any difference, but
except maybe what you will hear them say, which does sound like there's a lot of value in it with the design professional, the owner, the general contractor, kind of moving through that process together.
Mm-hmm.
But does that constitute the addition of a whole nother manager? You see what I'm saying? So,
right.
and that's been the my problem personally, is does it bring the amount of value that we're paying for? Because I think if you go back and look at the examples of many of you sitting in this room have done design, bid, build all of these years. You have a good working relationship. There's not it's not a free-for-all when somebody leaves out a light fixture or a particular type of a receptacle or the conduit, whatever. Everybody figures it out and they move on because the contingency money's there, whether it's CM or hard bid, and we figure out who is at that. But you answered that, I guess, sort of painted a more clear picture of how your license the same, and that you have performed the same types of work, if not even more complicated, with doing something like a prison dormitory or whatever. But yet that work does not, you're not lending any credit, like Mr. Buddy was talking about. When they score you, they don't give you any points for that because it was not CM, construction
right.
management.
Yeah.
And I've heard some some stories of, and I know one of the comments you made that kind of perked me up was you just didn't have time to try to go after that niche or that thing. And I guess I would first probably have to say, well, why not? You know, if that is a pathway that you saw was moving in that direction, why wouldn't you go in that? Why wouldn't you try to pursue that?
Well, you know, I also have a private market that I do, you know, CM, we've done some CM work in private market. We've done, mostly it's design build, but we bump heads sometimes with competitors that are in, you know, my space. We typically do design build church buildings, and they get complicated too sometimes. But there's some people in our space that you know, they'll submit a proposal. A church is sophisticated enough to put together, you know, a RFP, and they, you know, and they vet us against some other competition. And, you know, we've been shortlisted a few times, and then we didn't get it because we wasn't local or something like that, you know. But as far as the public work goes, when I saw this shift happening from something I was good at to something that I was going to have to create, I mean, that's not something you can just do overnight. I mean, to get good at presenting your qualifications for a CM, you know, at-risk proposal, that's just not something you can throw together. It takes years. It takes, you know, time to put it together. We were in a downturn economy, and I didn't have time to fool with it. I mean, we had to go after some work. So I did what I did best, and we went after some hard bid jobs and some negotiated jobs. But, you know, again, I want to be able to be qualified and shortlisted, you know, at some point in the future. And I'm not saying today I expect that, but I want to be able to compete. You know, I'm a competitor by nature. I just love to compete. It don't matter what it is. And design, bid, build fits me real well. You know, in my charge about being competitive. But you know, I can also be good at CM at risk because we've done so much design, build, you know, work. But I didn't pursue it because I didn't have time. But then I went to a convention, and I saw one of my competitors pull up in a bus and load all the people that are on these committees. I saw them pull up in a bus and load them all up and take them somewhere, you know. And I was like, well, you know, I don't have time to do that, and I don't have the money to do that. And to me, why would they be doing that if it's objective process? You know, if it's subject to what you've done for me lately, it's not competitive. So, you know, and I'm not good at that space. I just don't do well there in that space. I want to be selected based on our credentials and what we do and our competitive drive to get the job done. That's what I want to be selected on.
Well, we have a few more minutes with you, and
Yeah.
I wanted you to try to do something for us that might be hard to do off the cuff like this. But if you had to make just a couple of recommendations of areas that this committee would need to really dig deeply into, what would they be? What would a couple of things that you think we need to look at?
On CM at risk or both?
No, about trying to level this playing field some with what is clearly, and that's why this study committee even exists, is because there are hundreds of contractors across the state that have fought for years and never been shortlisted one time.
Right.
You know, and so how can we take some of that subjectivity out of it, or try to make it more open and competitive, et cetera?
on the CM at risk, you know, obviously, if you want that, if an owner wants that delivery method, you know, there's a reason they pick that, okay? And I don't know if it's the reason they want to pick it is because they want to, you know, steer the work to a certain company. I don't know, but I think the first step is there should be some justification on the owner's level for wanting to use. I think that the default delivery method should be design, bid, build. That's just my thought. And then if you have a project that requires the CM at risk benefits, there should be some justification for that. This is why
Time,
you-
design,
whatever it may be.
complexity, and
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah, and so I think that's the first step is you got to have a default position as a public entity. That's just my opinion now. I just feel like you have to have a default position,
Okay.
and that would require the owners to justify this is why we need this method. Okay.
It will help us do A, B, and
Yeah.
C.
Yeah, that's the first step. And the second step would be that there needs to be some sort of control over, and, you know, like Marvin said, you know, high risk, high reward, and some companies have made lots of money, you know, a lot more money than I have, but, you know, there's some companies that have plenty of money to spend on, you know, taking people to dinner and going, you know, I think that if you want to answer to the public and say, you know, this was a competitive, you know, it didn't have any subjectivity to it, the next step should be that you got to limit that influence, because like Mark said, some of these rural communities, man, you take them out to dinner and feed them a steak and they're just your friend forever. You know, I mean, that's even in the private sector. I mean, you know, I've seen that. So, you know, they're easily influenced, and that takes away the competitive nature of even in the rural setting as well. So I think there needs to be some kind of control over entertainment or whatever you want to call that.
Yeah, we had someone tell us, and when I say we, I am referring to me and either another contractor or someone that was with me. I'm not speaking for these committee members, but it came up in conversation, and someone mentioned that it was on a jail in Appling County a couple of weeks ago or something. That sheriff had been contacted a year and a half earlier
Oh, yeah.
to go eat lunch and to start sitting down and talking to this company. Went on and again, I'm not saying that, I'm telling you, I know the sheriff's a great guy, but they started knocking on his door
Yeah.
like a year and a half before the RFQ or any of that had come out. And so is that what you're talking about? That some of these people that are finding out about monies coming either through SPLOST or state money, they start going and soliciting them and saying, hey, we want to be, and let me show you this school we built, and let me show you that jail we built, and let's go on a quail hunt.
Yeah, some of these CM firms, I mean, they have marketing departments that's all they do. You know, I testified last time that, you know, the one that I know of's got a lobbyist. I mean, that's ridiculous.
Third.
Yeah,
You've
okay.
done two so far.
Okay.
Give me one more
All right.
and we're going to move on.
All right. The third thing would be that there's when you advertise for these projects, there needs to be somebody's got to put together some kind of budget, you know, and list. Okay, this is a $2 million job, or it's a $10 million job, or a $50 million job, so that somebody like me, I'm not going to go after a $50 million job. I can't qualify for that. I've not done a $50 million project. You know, I've done a $25 million project, but not a $50 million project. So I know I'm not gonna waste my time going after that. So you need to have some requirements that state, you know, what the project is in a dollar amount. Whether you want to reveal the budget or not, that needs to be in the RFQ. And then there needs, in the RFQ, there also should be a place to where there should be a dollar amount listed for their, you know, indirect overhead. Indirect overhead would be your job site overhead. So, you know, if it was a, you know, 12-month project, you need to have that listed out as well. So I feel like that if you, on a CM, if you list the budget, ask the CM to provide, you know, their general conditions cost, and then list a percentage fee, you know, then I think that helps a lot. And then the way it's scored out should be more weighed on, you know, the pricing. It should be a, you know, fairly heavy weight for the pricing, or scoring for your pricing. But of course, if you're not, you know, there should be some weight given to your qualifications too. I mean, what have you done? I mean, GC work and CM work should both qualify equally, you know.
Right.
So off the cuff, that's,
No,
you
that
know.
sounds great. That sounds great. And that's kind of what we're going to be looking for more of from everyone in these last couple of meetings. Not just, this is what's happening to me, but here's some recommendations maybe that you can consider.
Mhm.
And I know that Mr. Buddy and I talked for a few minutes this morning before the meeting. And that's the hard part of this. Sitting and listening and asking tough questions is easy as pie. But putting something down on paper that
Yeah.
would potentially look at making changes to law or policy or how we do things is a whole nother. That's when you really get the Marvin Woodwards of
Yeah.
the world stirred up. Is when you start putting stuff on paper.
Yeah.
But Steve, I appreciate you, buddy. You've
Yes.
been very good about calling me and
Yeah.
just talking to me on the good and bad. You
Yeah.
know, just like you
Yeah.
just said, you're not in here doing away with construction management. You're just saying, here's some things you might want to do
Yeah.
differently. Thank you so
Absolutely.
much.
All right. Thank you.
Mr. Trey Anderson, Anderson Construction. And Mr. Oh, I'm sorry, Mr. Buddy.
Could I ask something else before we get started? And maybe GSFIC would be the ones to answer this, but do we have a survey or some type of listing of problems that we had with design, bid, build? I guess what I'm asking is, why did we create another method? Were there major problems involved? And you may want to save that if you've got somebody from GSFIC going to talk later on, but
No, I would imagine that about everybody in this room could answer part of that. Do you want to before we dig in deep with Mr. Trey? You want to give that a shot about what were some of the problems? And they actually testified in committee, and maybe you can just confirm what I'm about to say. They did have tremendous problems with these people coming in trying to lowball these jobs and not being able to complete them on time and under budget, and just one problem after the next. And particularly in the downturn of the economy, when you had people who had never built these kind of jobs going after more of them. Isn't that what you were sharing with us? And all of a sudden you had people that were just getting the job based on price and not looking at the qualifications and the experience. And am I heading in the right direction? I mean, does that sound right? Is there something else that you'd? Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I think that's a great question. Have we done a survey? No. I mean, I guess it's just kind of through the school of hard knocks. I also serve on the board of the Construction Owners Association of America, so I have a chance to interact with construction owners all over the country. And so I hear a lot of, stories that way and perspective there as well. But I think I've been in this job 9 years. I've been at the table with attorneys, I'm gonna think five times on construction projects. 4 of those were design bid build. One was a CM, but that was a dispute between the sub and the contractor. It wasn't a dispute with the owner, we just got dragged in. So usually, it's over time or quality. The project came in really late, or the quality of the work was substandard, so we had to call timeout, bring another contractor in to finish, and so we were in a dispute over payment. One time is they left out some reinforcing steel in a Department of Juvenile Justice. They just were circumventing the process. We didn't catch it right away, and so shortcuts are taken. So I don't know if I'm answering your question, but
Well, yeah, and you know, you know the field, and you know there have been some problems. I guess what I'm after is, and when those problems occurred, at the point that we were at design bid build, was there no investigation of a contractor who submitted the lower bid? I mean, nobody tried to see whether they were qualified to do that or not.
once they submit a bid, if they're low bid, they're in.
All right, so it was
If-
strictly low bid, and,
If everybody did the work like he talked about ahead of time, the process would go better. The problem is I can't select him if he's not the low bid. You gotta
Yeah.
take,
okay, and then
there's
that goes
usually a
back,
reason somebody's low
yeah.
bid.
That goes back, I guess, to your subcontractors having to bid early and you not being familiar with that too. So, but I'm trying to put together, when I look at the construction management, the criteria for evaluation, only 15% of that is based on the firm level of quality, services to previous customers, et cetera. So have we solved that problem with our construction management details here? The rest of what we do with construction management is just based on how well they talk, and make a presentation. Should, maybe, Mr. Chairman, and my question is, should
Yeah.
we, at some point, look at making a bigger percentage of the acceptance of a firm on the construction management based on their previous experience?
I believe we've solved that. If somebody makes a short list for us to the point where they get to the table and get interviewed, at that point, all those firms can do the job. We aren't necessarily looking at the qualifications of the firm at that point. We're looking at the ability of that team that they set before us to get the job done. 'Cause
Well,
any-
and I guess
did
that's my question. If we solved the problem with just looking at previous experience, then I'm not sure that the presentation of a team that may be very polished and so forth should make a lot of difference if a firm has qualified on those pre-existing conditions, if you will, pre-existing construction. Why do we put 85% of that then on how they talk about what they're gonna do currently? And that may be entirely reasonable, but I'm just
No,
asking.
good-
I'm not familiar with this process.
Good question. I guess it's our experience has been that if a firm qualifies, sometimes we're not always getting their A team. They may have other work elsewhere, so you may be getting their C or D team. So you have to get comfortable with that project team. So at that point, I mean, it really does come down to their approach and the experience of the folks that they're putting before you. That doesn't mean the company can't do the job. It's just maybe that team they're putting before you isn't the best fit for that type of project, even though the overall firm may be. Was that helpful?
It is, but I guess I was in business long enough and
Right.
talked to people long enough that, if a firm's got the qualifications.
Right.
Then, you know, maybe all else we need to know is, are you using a different team from what you used on the one we're looking at your qualifications on? And, you know, that might be the only question need to be asked, not necessarily, you know, go through all this other procedure. But, and I'm not making an argument, I'm just throwing some things out there that I'd like for the committee to consider, you know, as we look into this.
Right.
I thank you for your answers.
All right, you're welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Woodward. Mr. Trey Anderson, thank you so much for coming up, and I guess you heard as I asked Mr. Adlot, you're welcome to share. You've got about 20 minutes. We got a couple other presenters. Mr. Buddy said he better be walking out that door right there at 1 o'clock. So, all right.
Here today. Our firm, Anders Construction, is from South Georgia, Clay County, Fort Gaines. We're a community of 3,600 residents. We have no stoplights, a lot of cotton, a lot of peanuts, and a lot of pine trees. GISFIC doesn't come to see us much down there, but we have done some of the work over the years. And our firm has worked as a construction manager, has worked as a design builder. We will do operation and maintenance work for the federal government. So we're a very diversified firm. I guess my main interest in coming here today is to talk to y'all about what I've seen in the CM at risk procurement method, primarily in the K through 12 sector in our state. At the state level and at the federal level, our company feels very good about submitting a proposal and it being reviewed by professional evaluators who understand the weighting factors, the criteria that separates one contractor from another. Where I have really big concerns is on the local school board level. You made a point a minute ago, that phone call occurring 18 months before a project's out there. There have been numerous occasions in Southwest Georgia, and I'm not going to name names, but jobs are basically awarded before we even see them on the radar screen. I mean, it's the whining and dining that occurs at the Bootstrap Conference, the Georgia Superintendent Schools Association, the Georgia Educators. It's no big secret that the construction managers, the architects, and vendors basically sponsor those things, and they wine and dine, and it occurs. I really personally feel that crosses an ethical line. It gives the perception that some of these people making these procurement decisions have been swayed before they even see a proposal. That is my big concern. I've written down quite a few notes. Much has been covered in this meeting already. I'm going to kind of flip through here. I did have a few things to add. I think one of the things I'd like this board to know is I looked at our last 20 years of jobs that this company's performed, and K-12 has always been a big part of our business, both in Alabama, Florida, and Georgia. In Georgia, the amount of K-12 projects we have performed in the last 10 years has dropped by 50%. Basically, we have been eliminated from competition and eliminated from the ability to work in our geographical area by the construction at risk. I wouldn't say delivery system, but the evaluation system that selects contractors that pretty much have done their marketing homework. For a small town community, that's a big deal for us. We're the largest employer in our county. If we don't get those jobs, we don't keep people employed. The chairman asked just a minute ago, what can this committee do? I guess, for lack of a better term, to level the playing field. I want to reiterate or basically shout my agreement with is that I think there should be a norm in state and local procurement, and that norm should be design, bid, build. I also believe that construction management at risk should be selected when there are certain salient characteristics of the job that make it unique. GISFIC made the argument this morning about the overlapping of design and construction, and that is a great thing. It is definitely a time saver. But before construction at risk was out there, architects basically and engineers designed the site work package ahead of the completion of the remainder of the package. They bid it out to local grading contractors. The grading started, and there was no CM at risk delivery method. There were two prime contractors. There was a prime site work contractor, and there was a prime building contractor. So the argument is you can overlap the design of the building and the site work component of the building without CM at risk. That's a very important distinction to make. I really feel in the bottom of my heart that CM at risk should not be used at a school board level. It is a different delivery system. The evaluation process has the potential for fraud in it. I'm not saying that occurs, but it sometimes makes you wonder if the potential is there, there's the possibility that it occurs. CM at risk is a evaluation of proposals. People that are professionally engaged in that process should be doing that, not for somebody that's elected to a school board that can't tell you a concrete footer from a pier. And that's the level of ability you see in people grading these proposals. I have a little bit of a problem with the advertising requirements. I think the current laws in the state procurement manual require 4 weeks of advertisement in a legal organ prior to making the documents, or once the documents become available. I think that the legal organ requirements should be expanded to include state or national publications, or even state agencies, Department of Administrative Services, or other forms to get the project that's out there well advertised. I had one case, $20 million job in our area. It was buried down in the legal section. We missed it, and it was awarded. One CM at risk proposal was received, and guess who got the job? It was.
Is there, I think we heard maybe last committee hearing, is there a website, or is there something that you can request to have something emailed to you?
Yeah, there's several of them, and that's part of the confusion in the state of Georgia. There's too many of them. There really needs to be a clearinghouse. The federal government's done a pretty good job of doing that within their realm. They have a website called fedbizops.org, and it basically captures every agency in the United States, and you can sign up for certain parameters. If you're a electrical contractor doing business in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama, and you like jobs between $100,000 and $1 million, well, it will filter that criteria, and you'll get an email every night at 2:30 in the morning, and you know that job exists. I think there's an opportunity in the state of Georgia to do something very similar. I think the Department of Administrative Services does it. The Board of Regents does it. Georgia Adult and Technical Education does it. GISFIC probably does it. There's a lot of competing websites out there to gather that information. Another concern I've got in the CM at risk industry, I believe that some of the subcontractors submitting bids for bid packages are owned in whole or part by the CM. I feel like that crosses an ethical line. I don't think that should be allowed, but we're seeing the merger and acquisition business in our industry, general contractors, CM at risk people buying electrical contractors, site contractors, and they're creating this vertical monopoly where they have a lot of the pieces that can fit into this big overall pie. And just say an unscrupulous contractor says, well, I own this electrical sub, and this electrical sub X and this electrical sub Y, they're always high as hell. We can get this job because we can put a fair price on it, or a price that maybe not quite so fair, and build it into our system. So I think there needs to be some transparency about ownership of some of these entities that are working within these firms. Previous speaker spoke about whining and dining. I really think, and I think I mentioned this previously, that that practice should be prohibited. But if it is not, I think there should be ethical standards of reporting, just like you as elected officials. If you get taken out to dinner and you have to record it on a statement, I think that the people that are marketing to these school boards should have the same responsibility. A couple of months ago, I got interviewed by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the writer was discussing what can be done in South Georgia to stimulate our economies. It's a complicated issue. I served as 8 years as chairman of the Clay County Commission, so I'm very in tune to what our problems are and the things working against us. But I can tell y'all here today that taking business away from small, capable firms like Anderson Construction Company is one way to stimulate an economy. Not only should we be allowed to qualify our general contractor experience as equal to construction manager experience, we should also possibly consider for more points for being local. And I think some of the CM programs do that. But there's a lot of great comments here today. Those are a few things off the cuff that I like to see done, and I'll answer any questions you may have.
Okay, well, I'll follow up on your very last comment about points for local participation. I can't remember if it was Mr. Buddy and I, maybe Representative Martin. It was a little bit of a shock, even under the GISFIC model, that ability to use local participation, I think, was 15%. But no one's following up on that. Who is following up when the construction management at risk firm is performing the work while they're actually on the job site? Concrete, heating and air, etc. So not only is it a very small part of how you're selected, no one's policing that. I use the example of a job in my home community of a $15 million allied health building. I drive by it every day, and I know every subcontractor in South Georgia. I just run into them on job sites, or either I go to church with them or in the exchange club with them or whatever. I'm sure that when they did their interview and when they went through their process shortlisted, they said, "Oh yeah, we're going to use everybody local." And they got a 15 out of 15. But how do you come back and police that?
I'll tell you one way, and my competitors in here, or the state of Georgia contractors, probably shoot me when I say this, but state of Alabama's got a way of enforcing it kind of through a fine method. And basically in the state of Alabama, when we send a contract off, one of the critical pieces of paper is a list of subcontractors. You have to list their trade, their firm's name, and their location, I think even a phone number and a contact. That little piece of paper somehow makes it around to an enforcement division. And basically, you're in the job 3 months, and they show up on the job and may show up at 6 months, and they look for electrical contractor Z, and they will check, number one, that he's there, number two, that if he's got his license, and they're really good at writing fines about people not keeping up with their payments to the states for license fees and that type of thing. That's what they use it for, but a similar system could be put in place for this.
Well, I've got a couple of questions for you down here. I'm going to start down at the very end. Good morning, sir. Okay, go ahead.
Morning, Mr. Chair.
Yes, sir.
And pardon my ignorance, I was just curious to if either our committee or our illustrious speaker could help me define or understand when we say local. I could interpret local as being a Georgia-based business or I could interpret local as being a contractor from South Georgia and someone from Blue Ridge coming down to bid not being local. And I think it kind of turns into a fine line of propriety and how do you kind of determine, do you give, one level of percentage points if it's a Georgia business, but then does that percentage increase if it's local to the job that's going on, whether it's a dormitory or research center or a new city hall. I'm thrilled with doing as much local as possible, but I think personally, I think it should also be, maybe some kind of added incentive if the local contractor is actually from the area versus 300 or 400 miles away. I think it kind of keeps the jobs flowing in that local community and keeps the money in.
I think that's a real good question, and it's very hard to define. I'll give you a great example. Where we live in Fort Gaines, of 3,600 people, there are not any electrical contractors, plumbing, heating, and cooling. So there are regional markets in our area. We got Columbus, Georgia, Albany, Tallahassee, and Dothan, Alabama. That's where most of our subcontractor community comes from. And you talk about local participation. If you draw a 60-mile radius around Fort Gaines, well, it goes 45 or actually 59 miles into the state of Alabama. Is that person local? So you got a lot of things to consider. One of the things I see in the CM at risk, and I follow the larger jobs in our geographic region, I see the electrical contractor, the heating and cooling contractors, they're often metro area contractors. It's not unusual to see that. And, if that was my job, I would probably have a subcontractor from Dothan or Tallahassee or Columbus. I mean, if I was in that same set of shoes. But it's, the CM at risk is going to typically put forth their favorite 3 contractors regardless of where they come from. And they're probably hoping that one of them gets it. So to answer your question, it's a very difficult thing to define. It's hard to put points on and what's fair. Would it be fair for me in Georgia to have 4 of my major subs from Alabama? Does that look good? But they employ people from Georgia just like I employ people from Alabama and Georgia. So.
All right, thank you, Mr. Gordon. Now, remind me what your counties are that you serve. Chatham, okay. Yeah. Thank you. Mr. Buddy's got a question for you.
Yeah, I'd like to go back, and I appreciate you mentioning the stimulating the economy, because I think that's a real factor, and how we look at making that happen is something that we'll leave up to the professionals. But one thing you brought to mind, and I don't remember whether it was a licensing board or the state or who, but you mentioned Alabama. Come around checking on people. The licensing board for contractors in Georgia, of course, so you got to have a license to practice.
Correct.
Does that board have any qualifications on ethics or the types of things we've been talking about? I guess what I'm trying, maybe we could solve some of the problems we've heard about this morning through a board action, because if a person is caught violating a board rule basically and loses their license because they did some of the things we've been talking about. How does that operate? How is that board set
The state of Alabama, from a progressive point of view, is 10, 15 years behind Georgia, I'll be honest with you. It's very easy to get a contractor's license in the state of Alabama. They have a similar arm to GISFIC called the Alabama Building Commission. They just renamed it and they're reorganizing. It's ASFIC or something like that now. But I'm not sure if they have any rules on ethics, but I know they are revenue driven because they basically fund their building commission, a lot of their licensing review agencies through the user fees that are generated by permits and licenses. So they have a driven culture to go out there and seek that revenue, and I see that routinely throughout the state. I don't know who the most progressive state is in ethics. Mark Woodall probably better be able to address that better than I could.
Yeah, I just, in dealing with boards, and I have all my life, I'm licensed by the pharmacy board, and the bug board gets the chairman down there, but, you know, what we had run into, I had a federal judge call me last year and say, don't pharmacists have any ethics? And I said, what are you talking about? He said, well, I understand they will not discuss price with you if your pharmacy benefit manager says you pay this copay, even if the pharmacist could sell it to you less, he's not allowed to tell you that. And I said, that's not pharmacist ethics, that is law. Basically, the PBM contracts with the pharmacist, and he puts in the contracts, you may not discuss price with your patients because they want their product used. And I guess that brought to mind because we passed a law last year that said you cannot any longer include that in a contract where you're contracting with a pharmacist. You can't take away that ability of him to help his patient. And I'm just wondering if a licensing board might have the authority to put in place some things that said, you know, this is the ethics of contracting, and if violated, then your license is in danger. If that might,
That's a possibility. If it was legislated, I'm sure it'll be up to a lot of scrutiny, to a lot of parties to be involved in that process. But, from an ethical point of view, I think a great comment came up earlier talking about getting that late, non-responsive or outlier bid. That's what we call them, outlier bids that you get and you look at, and I throw them in the trash. I'm not going to risk a 53-year-old business on a guy that's 30% low, and I know he's not supposed to be 30% low. But there are a lot of things in ethics that probably are needed with a lot of contractors. I hear all kinds of horror stories. We routinely receive better pricing from subcontractors because we don't shop bids, we pay our subs on time, and we administrate our contracts fairly. And as a matter of fact, I actually get some bids from subcontractors that says if Superintendent X does this job, you can take $20,000 off this price because they're better to work with, or they're, so there's reason why subcontractors give prices better to the others. But the contractors that shop bids, that's a bad thing, and there should be some form of ethics, whether it's at a mandated state level or subcontractors just plain boycotting them.
thank you.
Well, you got anything else you'd like to share with us? I do appreciate you. Mr. Gerald Green, Representative Gerald Green, had called me one day and said, you need to call Trey Anderson.
Well, and Gerald and I have been good friends for a long time. Being a county commissioner, he helped me a lot. He's known my family. We're excited to be a part of this process, and we hope that some tangible changes come out of it that level the playing field, and that's the reason I'm here today.
Well, one of the things that you echoed, I think that Mr. Adlot shared, was kind of the default delivery method, and I've heard that quite a bit over the years. And I think Mr. Woodward shared with us that of the $1.56 billion that we have bonded, over 80% of that is going construct. 70, I'm sorry. 70% of
money.
that. Well, particularly from zero. If you go back to the day that we started, to go from 0 to 70 in really 20 short years.
Mm-hmm.
And I always like to think I'm young, but I'm not. And I just wonder about someone trying to come in and own your company after you, or another generation of young men, that trend continues. Young women, excuse me. She looked at me when I said young men. I just wonder, and that's kind of what we're trying to find, that balance, where and how and when and what to do about this. But
well, as I said before when I opened up, I do consider Cement Risk a viable project delivery system, and I really think the pendulum has swung too far. There are owners invariably want their projects faster, And you mentioned a minute ago, how do you put a value on compressing that schedule 3 months? It's difficult to do. But there are many, the conventional design build, bid build project delivery system can be just as effective from a cost time frame, especially if you do what I was talking about earlier, compressing the site, having a separate site work prime contractor versus a building contractor. So I think you can achieve both that time and cost, and third item is quality in either way. But I think the default should be design bid build, because most projects, and I'm not talking about GISFIC, they've got the bigger jobs, but school boards that do $10 million and less jobs, they don't need their job accelerated to the point where they're paying extravagant premiums to have those jobs completed.
Right. Well, Mr. Anderson, thank you so much. I hope you'll stick around, and got some other presenters. But Brian Newsom. With Albion, is that right?
That's correct.
Thank you so much for joining us. I don't think we've met yet.
No, not.
And
no.
we appreciate you coming and sharing with us, and we're going to give you the floor.
Thank you all very much, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I've got a couple of minutes of prepared statement, and then just been a great back and forth on the conversation. I've got a couple of points I wanted to bring up as a result of that as well, if I could. First off, obviously, thank you all very much for having me here. My name is Brian Newsom. My wife and I own Albion. It's Albion Scotia Enterprises. We shorten it to Albion, make it easy for everybody. But we're a general contractor, commercial builder in Sandy Springs here in the metro area. We're a little over 15 years old. We're a small firm. Last year, we did about $14 million in revenue. So that'll tell you I'm a rounding error on a lot of these companies' balance sheet. But we employ 23 people and have enjoyed in this market some of the benefits of working in the CM at risk community. If you look at the competition and the way that process is balanced out in our mind, we enjoy the opportunity to compete with some of the largest companies in the world. If you go through that process as we did, you learn how to put together a simple proposal, and they cap these proposals. They're not 2 inches. They're usually 45 to 50 pages. And most of that is experience of your people, experience of the projects that you've performed, and a little bit of information about yourself. That usually gets enough information out for everybody. We learned that process early on. I said we're 15 years old. About 12 years ago, they started allowing companies to do CM risk. That's when we first started getting introduced to it. And so at that time, and still to this day, we were performing hard bid work. And we'll continue to do that as well. You call it design bid build. We just shorten it hard bid. Everything's hard bid to us. So we turned our attention to that model because we liked the teamwork approach. The term adversarial came up early on, and I want to expound on that just for a second. We looked at CM at risk and said it allows us to be a team member, and you've heard that term bantered back and forth several times. And it gave us the additional time in pre-construction, and that's been a point of conversation throughout the day is what's the difference? If you're going to hard bid this project, you're going to price it, and you're going to put a schedule together, and that's the same thing you do in pre-construction. And I would argue that that's not necessarily completely the right answer. It is obviously a byproduct. We will produce a schedule, and we will produce a price. But we are also working on the same side of the table with the owner who has said, listen, I've only got X dollars to spend on this thing. We've got to come in on budget or under budget on this, and we've got to produce a schedule that's going to produce an end result in time so these students can be in the seats or we can take advantage of the benefits of this building. And so we're working all the way through that process with subcontractors, our trade contractor partners, to look at and evaluate what's being designed and make decisions on that pricing. So rather than a project being over-designed and you don't find out until the bid day, and I had one of those last week. We actually hard bid a project. The project is way over budget. As a result, it's not going to happen. We invested a lot of time and effort to put that together. We could have saved that owner that headache and that surprise and shock if we had worked with them in a CM capacity up front. We would have identified very quickly, this project's going to be over budget. You're introducing an HVAC system in here that is so over-engineered for what you need that you're going to spend a lot of money for nothing. And so that value add goes on through that process in pre-construction, so that when we do go to what I call at risk, when we've locked down the number, we know that we're going to have very few, if we don't eliminate completely, most change orders at all. Because we've worked through the process with them. We understand the depth and knowledge of what's going on in that building. So we're not just pricing the drawings. And I want to get back to my point here. In the hard bid, what I call hard bid, and like I said, we still do it, but in the hard bid, the owner hires architect to produce what is supposed to be 100% set of drawings. And I don't know any contractor in the world that would tell you that they've ever seen 100% set of drawings. The difference between 100% and whatever that delta is typically reflected as a change order. The architects will admit that they would love to have 100% set of drawings. A lot of them are very proud of their drawings, but there's no such thing. It doesn't exist. So we all know that if you're bidding in a hard bid environment, you bid the drawing. You drill it into your people, you bid the drawing. You do not bid the intent, you bid that drawing, because the only way you're going to win that project is if you bid the drawing. You can't assume what the architect wants you to do, and you can't assume what the owner was wanting in the end result. You only have the specs and these drawings, and that's it. So I'll tell you a real life experience. We were going after a project. It's a hard bid environment. We came in second. We came in second by not much money. And one of the things that we noticed in those drawings were that the countertops for the chemistry lab were the wrong type. They had to be a special type of countertop for chemistry labs. They didn't have those specified. As much as I'm pounding on the fist, on the table in my estimating department, do not bid the intent, bid the drawing. They said, no, Brian, we can't in good faith bid this drawing. We know that these are the wrong countertops. So we said, go with it. We won't have a change order. Well, it's going to be straight up. We're going to do it the right way. This is the honest way to do this. We lost the bid, came in second. The owner got a change order in the very first meeting for the countertops. If you added that change order and what our number was, we would have won that project if we had taken that out. That's a simple one. And your point early on was absolutely correct. That should be an E&O policy from the architect. Should go right to the architect and say, you're responsible for this. And that sounds like an open checkbook. Oh, sure, my insurance company's going to write you a check. But what you end up with then is the big dance that we were talking about earlier, that there's a huge battle that now ensues, because that owner's going to have to argue with the architect on who told me what, and a year later they might not have that settled yet. They're still fighting over it. So that's a simple example of what I refer to as a fallacy in that we can get a good solid number in a hard bid environment. Yes, you can, and in the right scenario, absolutely, it's a perfect tool to use. But you have to be careful about what you end up with and not expecting that you have to have a huge contingency or a larger contingency there, because you've got a gap in those drawings and it exists in every project, The CM at risk process for us is one where we can marry our knowledge and skills with the architect's knowledge and skills and put that together to work for the owner's benefit, to come together at the end with a product of, here's a valid price we know we can hang our hat on, and we know we're going to do it within a certain time frame, and we can actually, as Mr. Woodward has mentioned, we get started sooner. We can get into demo right away without having to worry about the drawings even being started, because I don't need drawings to demo. I know generally what I'm going to go into and do this, and it exposes the building so I can see the backbones of the issues I'm dealing with, particularly in a renovation. Or in a scenario where it's a new construction, I'm digging up the ground and I'm open and exposing the problems that I might have. So that the problems that you would not have exposure to in a hard bid scenario, you get absolutely full exposure to in a CM at risk. The process, let's talk for a second about the process. We consider it to be a pretty fair and transparent process, and we've learned a lot over the years, obviously, and it has evolved. I will say that CM today is different than it was even 10 years ago, but we've learned a lot in that process. We're competing, as you know, with the largest contractors in the world. So we have to make it to the short list. That's our big goal. That's your first step. Do I get invited to the dance? And so in that 45 pages, you're putting your best foot forward. Who are my people? What's my experience? The one thing that I hear over and over again, and I like a lot, and I think it's a good model, is to eliminate any concern about having that project that you're presenting be CM at risk. I think that's absolutely wrong. And if you look at us 12 years ago, we didn't have CM at risk. We just had good projects that we had done. So somebody had to give us a shot. I don't think there's any difference between a good, solid general contractor doing that work under a design bid build model or CM at risk. If they've built that building, they know how to build a building. Let them in just like they let me in because I have CM at risk on my project title. So I agree with you 100% on that. That needs to be taken out. No points on that one. The other part that's been discussed is the difference between the sophistication and the skills of the Board of Regents or TCSG or GSFIC versus a local school board. I recognize that up front. You don't see us chase local school board work. We won't do it as a company. Primarily because we think that those relationships in those local areas are pretty strong and that there is going to be some bias there. And so we just tend to shy away from that. We tend to look where we can count on transparency and fairness in the evaluation. And so that's something that I think should be considered, should be looked at. It's fairly consistent with what we've heard here today. And I said I was going to be prepared, but I kind of got off subject there. Let me talk about a couple of things also that I do think. I mentioned one of them where we said we talked about the size of the proposals. Those are limited pages. Heck, some of the schools have gotten into the point where we were not even allowed to put a binder on it. They want it on a paper clip because it's wasteful. And so we'll take our double-sided 24 pages and put a binder clip on and hand it in. That's how simple that can be. It's not real complex there. The other one is there was discussion about the downturn in the economy. When the downturn in the economy started, it even more motivated us to push effort into CM at risk because what we found in the downturn in the economy, a lot of unqualified contractors started showing up to go after hard bid work. And the common joke in our industry is the guy that wins is the guy that forgot something. And every contractor, the happy day is the day they win. The worst day is also the day they win because they come running back from the bid opening and they're saying, "What did I forget?" Everyone thinks it. What did I forget? And then you get back and settle in. Okay, I didn't forget anything. I just got lucky today. Today was my day. But that's always a concern. And so it got even more exasperated when the economy turned south. People were taking very desperate numbers. They were doing things they shouldn't have done. They got involved in a lot of projects they shouldn't have gotten involved with. And we looked at it and said, all right, tell you what, let's try to stay away from that as much as we can. Let's do CM at risk. We know that if we're doing it correctly and we're presenting to a fair owner, that our qualifications should be just as strong as anybody out there. And not always do we win, obviously. I'd say probably on average, we probably win about 5% of what we go after, so which means we push out a lot of paper. We're sending those documents out on a regular basis. And there are some, the Georgia Procurement Registry is a wonderful tool. We use that fairly exclusively on projects that are advertised CM at risk. And that encompasses all the state agencies. So we've got a pretty good tool already. Not all of the school boards use it, but the state agencies all pretty much use it exclusively. So that's a great website we can go to, and it does push out to me things I'm looking for specifically. We talked about the risk. I think one of y'all brought up the point of risk and risk versus hard bid versus CM at risk. And I think you look at that risk from an owner's perspective. We've talked about the risk from the contractor's perspective, and certainly you could argue one versus the other. I'd say hard bid, there's a greater risk because I own that number the day I turn it in, and if I forgot something, I forgot, it's done. I don't have much more than that 4 weeks to have prepared for that. In CM at risk, I've got a little bit more time because I'm doing more vetting of the numbers, I'm doing more vetting of the drawings, and I can really help mature that drawing. And so there's a little bit less risk there. When you flip it over to the other side and look at the owner's perspective, that's where the great risk comes in. In a CM model, they've got a good team of professionals there working together to come up with a good solid number. And when we go CM at risk, we're now GMP, guaranteed max price, we're locked it in. The owner can pretty much rest assured that that's going to be very, very few change orders at that point, if any. And usually what we encounter is it's an owner-directed change order. He realizes, you know what, we're almost done with this project, and I'd like to add a few more things because I have maybe some contingency dollars that I can spend, and I'll go do that. In the hard bid scenario, the owner takes a lot of risk, and he's owning that risk because that's that gap I talk about in the drawings. That ends up being the owner. It's not the contractor's fault. He bid the drawings. And I can argue all day long that, hey, it's not in the drawing. I'm building that. I priced exactly what's in that drawing. So the owner then takes it because that's who my contract's with. He can fight with the architect for that or fight with the engineer. And he can even fight with me sometimes, but it's in the drawing. It's black and white. It's pretty obvious what where the risk is to me at that point. I have no risk in that scenario. So those are my prepared points. And I think that's it for me.
I did want to, you mentioned that you get about 5% of the work that you compete for. Mm-hmm. And one of the things I was talking to a gentleman earlier about is, and Mr. Anderson alluded to it, about rural economic development and rural contractors. You said you're from Sandy Springs. Mm-hmm. Being awarded 5% of the number of opportunities you have is a lot different than trying to win 5% of no opportunities where he's at. Mm-hmm. And I believe some of this problem was created geopolitically, where general contractors that were already located in areas that began to use this delivery method in the early days had more opportunities like you did 12 years ago or so you were able to kind of get your foot in the door on these $2 and $4 and $5 million projects, and then your resume would reflect that as you began to pursue more. Some of these guys, in some cases, have only had, and I use a general contractor in my home community because that's who I'm familiar with. That's who I work for as a representative. They have probably only had 4 or 5 shots at construction management opportunities within about 100 miles. You know, I think Mr. Anderson mentioned if you drew a 60-mile circle around his Fort Gaines, it goes 59 miles into Alabama or something, he said. And so I did want the committee and AGC and others to consider that as we move through this. Mm-hmm. And I think Representative Gordon was exactly right. You got to be careful about how you do that geographic thing, because that can come back to bite you too. You got greedy people locally, just like you've got greedy people my district will hear that and they'll love that, won't they? But you know what I mean. You got people going to game the system whether they're local or not. But I think some of this problem has resulted from the ones that were located in faster growing communities and more populated communities where there's just more projects happening closer to home had more opportunities. And a general contractor from Douglas, Georgia, is not going to be competitive in Dublin. Somebody from Dublin there will eat his lunch. He's not going to be competitive in Valdosta. Somebody from Valdosta will eat his lunch. Brunswick, Savannah. He's got to stay within that 80 to 90, he's got to stay within that circle of where he can be competitive. And so the same goes for when it transitioned to construction management. But now here's why he wants a seat at the table on bidding all these jobs. He'll do the same thing to you when you drive to Douglas and try to build one under design, bid, build. Maybe not every time, because you may be hungry. You may say, hey, listen, we don't have any jobs coming down the pipe. We just lost that one. We're going to drive to Douglas. So you probably could go down there and put a lot of pressure on him. But I want us to remember that a company like Albion, in a community like this Atlanta area, or Sandy Springs, they were able to get in easier. Not that it was easier work. There was a lot more opportunities for you to try to get involved in CM work. I'm not saying it was any. Mr. Woodward got on to me the first meeting we had. I said the word easy or something. He came unglued on me. But I don't mean to make it was not simple for you. It was not simple for any of these construction management firms to get involved. But in keeping with the theme of rural economic development and the number of schools that we're building in these small communities, or where these technical colleges are located and these state colleges, I don't know how to fix that. But since they were in slower growing, lower populated communities, they don't have a resume to turn in on a 50-something page proposal that says, I've done 10 CM jobs. Many of them have done 0. Because they really didn't even hardly have an opportunity. The second thing I was going to ask you, on the owner's risk, looking at it from the owner's risk standpoint, from their side of it, coincidentally, one of the better examples I have for an owner not being eliminated from any risk is Bacon County School System. Bacon County, Alma, Georgia, built a school, delivered it construction management at risk, and I went and sat down with them many times to try to get them to reconsider because of what we could see coming. That job went somewhere between $8 and $10 million over budget. Construction management at risk. Who ate that? I'll tell you who ate it. The taxpayers of Bacon County, absolutely. They unelected almost the whole entire school board in the next cycle. And so, how was the owner's risk not protected there? With the design professional, the owner, the architect, the contractor, and everybody working in unison? And I know you can't answer that specifically about that one, but I hear those stories even under CM at risk, where that job will, at maximum allowable, what's that?
Guaranteed max price.
Yeah, I always get that mixed up. Guaranteed maximum price. That a lot of them come in over that guaranteed. And if they don't, if there was contingency money set aside, am I the only one in the room that sees a problem with a school just adding some stuff at the end because they had some contingency money left? That money doesn't belong to that school. As much as that school board and superintendent would like to think that it does not. It belongs to the taxpayers of this state. And so how is that not a part of this conversation?
The contingency, we talked a bit about contingency through the process, and I would tell you that the taxpayers that elected those individuals to represent them in those scenarios, most of that contingency money that's left over is, at least from our perspective and the way we run these projects, we've provided value in what's called value engineered ideas. Hey, we can save some money if we don't do this. We can save some more money if we don't do this. And the owner up front might take advantage of those to make sure this project comes in on budget. And toward the end, they go back and say, you know what? We really would like to add some additional chemistry lab equipment, or we really would like to, not to the benefit of them personally, they're not using that building, but to the benefit of the tenant who's going to take advantage of that space. And so the owner, the president of the campus, or the person who's responsible for that building really needed this, but they couldn't get it because they were concerned about the project running over. And so most of the time when I say owner directed changes, it's to put functionality back into that building that we had to pull out potentially because of a cost overrun that they were expecting. And it didn't happen, and so therefore they were added back in. That's historically what we see. They're not just spending money just to spend money. It's not in anybody's benefit to do that.
Well,
But let me talk, you mentioned something else about radius, and I think this is a great idea. I'm just kind of speaking out of school here, but I'll tell you that the individual universities, so there's several universities that have IDIQ contracts, indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity. Usually they're a one-year contract, and they'll vet out a bunch of folks using a CM model to do this, and they'll pick a handful of folks that they can do small projects. These are small things that it's virtually impossible to go out and bid every one of these little projects. Go move a wall here, or go change the doorknob there. It's kind of crazy to bid that. And what they do when they advertise those, they almost always say 60-mile radius. And some of the universities have said, I tried that and I couldn't get enough contractors in my area in a 60-mile radius, so I had to expand it out a little bit. But you could easily add those to a CM at risk evaluation. You've got to be reasonable with what the distance is so you get qualified folks to show up. But there's no reason that'd be an easy thing for you to do, to add that says, give me a radius. Anybody in this radius now you want to support local geography, there's one way to do it. Now you got to be careful, because now you're going to cut out some folks potentially, and you have to look at the size of the project. That's where I see the downfall in this. Some folks aren't qualified to build a $50 million building. I'm certainly not. So you've got to get the correct folks showing up for those. And so you don't want to exclude people arbitrarily because of a desire to stay local, which is inadmirable, and I would encourage you to try and continue to do that. But you got to be careful of that. But there's a thought. I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, just one final question. Are you a member of AGC?
I am yeah, absolutely. Just in the last couple of years.
Well, we appreciate you coming, and keep old Mark straight. Tell him not to be too hard on me.
Thank you very much.
No,
Appreciate
thank you
it.
so much. You did a great job. Mr. Paul, I apologize that you had to sit and be patient and wait on this, but we're right on time. Going to try to wrap it up about 1, and but I do appreciate you coming and sharing, and we're going to give you the floor.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate the opportunity to be here. I'm Paul Roselle. I'm with HASAC Company out of Statesboro, Georgia, and we're a mechanical and electrical contractor, actually.
Hold that microphone up just a little bit.
I'm sorry.
No, they're recording it on the.
All
okay.
right. So I'm actually an electrical and mechanical subcontractor, or I like to call myself a specialty contractor as opposed to a subcontractor. But, you know, there's not a lot I can add to what the gentlemen before me have said that are in favor of the design bid build process. And I echo their sentiments for all the reasons that they noted when they were speaking. And, you know, I guess I do somewhat experience some of the issues that people do in the CM process, because they are beginning to push it into the college campuses, and I'm seeing jobs that were predominantly mechanical and electrical jobs and were predominantly hard bid at college campuses. Now they're beginning to push a lot of those jobs out in the CM process. And I see projects where I can't even, and this is where you say that the CM process is a process that can be biased or abused or misused. And I see projects that are bid as CM that I cannot understand why on earth it would be bid as a CM project. For instance, I bid a mechanical project not long ago, or I tried to bid it in the CM process, and it was basically a fully designed process. And have you heard the gentleman, posing the argument that the CM process was beneficial when it's used through the beginning of the design all the way to completion of design. And in this particular case, the project that I was bidding on had basically been fully designed, and yet the college was, or the university was, bidding it through the CM process. And so I was following a very voluminous CM selection criteria and trying to respond as a competent and responsive bidder by including all the additional costs that were required of a CM to bid the job. And as a taxpayer, I was fuming, and as a bidder, because I didn't understand why it was being handled that way. And as a taxpayer, I was looking and saying, we're adding in a lot more money unnecessarily, and I just don't I don't understand why this would happen. And of course, I got disqualified on the job through the rating process, where they take, in fact, I made a copy of the selection criteria, and and one of the questions when I went back and talked to them later just said, I really don't understand this process. I really don't understand why this job was bid as a CM job, and I keep missing these CM jobs here, and I think it's because the people that are more frequently getting the bids understand what the university is really looking for out of this criteria, whereas I'm responding in total, and maybe they're just responding in the fashion that they know that once they get awarded the job, they're going to, that it's all that the university is going to ask for. And, and I heard things like, well, we select people based on comfort level sometimes because, we've dealt with them before and they know what we're looking for. And, which means to me that you've got bias. And I had another person look at me and say, well, how many jobs have you done as a CM? And I looked at him and I said, well, none. But our company's been in business since 1946. It's been under current management, or my family's ownership, since 1956. I've been managing the business since 1979. We've done military projects. We've done K through 12 education. We've done higher education projects. We've done military projects galore, from just about any type project you can imagine. And just as these other gentlemen have said before me, I will guarantee you that we've done similar projects to this as a contractor numerous times over. I said, and we used to do a lot of work directly for the college under the hard bid process years ago, before this CM process started coming into play. And I just see it as something that the CM process is it's a tool that can be very easily misused by the people that want to misuse it, whether it's on a local school board level, or on a university level, or on any other level. I think that when a private owner wants to use the CM process, that's their business, that's their money. They can do anything with it that they want to. But when you're looking at it on a state level or a local level, the opportunity for abuse or misuse is very large. And for that reason, I'm very much in favor of the hard bid process in most circumstances. And as a subcontractor, you know, we were talking about, or as a specialty contractor, but in the in the open and transparency, I do believe that once a CM is selected, or when a CM is selected, in the cases where it does make sense to use a CM, that it ought to be an open bid process where people's bids are submitted and opened publicly, as opposed to behind the scenes where, again, you know, a construction manager can choose whoever he wants to work with. And in the hard bid process, that's a big advantage of that. Now, the specialty contractors' bids that are received aren't opened in public, but the prime bidders that are bidding the job, they are open in public. And I don't see any reason why you can't do the same thing in a CM process when that's chosen. And with that, I think that's about all I've got to say.
Well, great job. But one of the things, and I know you've covered some of this, but if you had to, on a scale of 1 to 10, or if you just wanted to say what your number one priorities would be, I think I heard you when you were talking. But what are just some initial things that you think we could look at least to change about this? Because you mentioned you've tried,
Yes,
you
sir.
know, to get these construction management jobs. What is it that perhaps we could look at that would give you an opportunity?
Well, I've heard a big concern is the quality of the bidder, the experience of the bidder that's doing the work. And, I think that you can qualify bidders up front, but you can qualify multiple bidders through the hard bid process. You can solicit bids from people, openly solicit information for people who, or contractors who want to bid on a job, and then evaluate their qualifications and make sure that they are indeed qualified to participate in the construction of the job. So I think that's one of the things that you can do. And the architect and engineer up front, and I heard that one of the values of selecting a CM is the hand-holding process, where he can take a lesser experienced owner, and usually that, as was stated before, that might be more on a local construction type project. But through the architect and engineer, you're hiring individuals. Number one, you're selecting them based on their prior experience with doing these type construction projects. And a lot of the architects and engineers that are doing these type jobs have been doing them for years, and they know which jobs are best suited based on a particular client's budgets. And they have years of construction or receiving prices on, receiving prices on projects to help them arrive at what a reasonable budget on the job should be, and what type construction methods should be used on the job. I lost my train of thought, but pretty much those are the things that I think that should guide the selection process.
You mentioned that as you began to look at a specific project, you were starting to get a little angry as a taxpayer, and you were getting upset as a business owner trying to bid this.
Yes, sir.
Why was that? You mentioned that you thought that job under CM was coming in, was it much higher or something than it would have if you had just hard bid it? Or
Well, I know in that particular case that I was adding costs to the job that were completely unnecessary
because of having to bid at CM?
through the CM process when it was a fully designed project already, or largely fully designed.
Mhm.
And that reminds me of another concern, is that, if a project runs over budget, well, I've seen for years and years in the hard bid process where the architect solicited at the time of the bid both deductive and additive alternates to the project, which, if the project did run over budget, that they could take work out of it that would help bring it into budget. And at the same time, if it ran under budget at bid time, they could also have options to add more to the project that was desired. So, and then you've also got the value engineering process that you can get from the participating contractors that can give unsolicited opinions on what are methods that could be used to bring a project back in line, and then they could be put out to the various bidders, and the bidders could bid on that, on the selected VE items. But
Well, you've done a great job, and I do appreciate you. We had met earlier, maybe a couple of months ago, and
yes, sir.
and I think Leader Burns had introduced me to you, and you're in John Burns and Butch Parrish's district. Is that? I'm sorry, Jack Hill's
Yes, sir.
Senate district.
That's correct.
Well, good. Well, if there's anything we can do for you, you let us know. Do the other committee members have any questions or any closing comments? Mr. Gordon, Mr. Harden? Y'all got anything? You got anything? Well, you know what? I know Mr. Buddy's excited. It's
Thank
not, and thank y'all for coming though. And we're going to try to schedule our next meeting for the first week of December, which right now looks like sometime around the 4th, 5th, or 6th. That's a Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday right in there. So just kind of make a mental note of that, and we are going to stand adjourned. Thank y'all so much.